Welcome to the TSASK B149.1 and SAS Codes of Practice 2025 code presentation. I'm Doug McKinnon, and I'll be your presenter. This presentation will cover the substantial changes to the CSA B149.1 2025 edition Natural Gas and Propane Installation Code and the 2025 Saskatchewan Codes of Practice to the CSA B149.1. Today we will be looking at new definitions, wording, and technical changes in the 2025 code. In the Saskatchewan Codes of Practice, we will review the technical changes and the new format. Here is how the presentation is color-coded. Slides with a white background are from the National Code. Slides with the blue background are from the Saskatchewan Codes of Practice. So what is the Saskatchewan Codes of Practice? This is a collection of additional requirements and clarifications from the National Code that are unique to Saskatchewan. The Saskatchewan Codes of Practice has been reformatted into two sections, Interpretations and Informative. Interpretations are enforceable requirements in the province. Informative is just good information or reference material to be helpful to contractors. Today we will be going over the interpretations in Saskatchewan compared to the National Code. Let's dive into the changes starting in Section 3, Definitions. An industrial regulator is a pressure regulator installed downstream of the service regulator and upstream of the gas equipment or another pressure regulator. Industrial regulators are uncertified regulators. It can be a certified regulator that is installed in an application where it does not meet the installation instructions or specifications that the 6.22 regulator is certified to, such as an inlet pressure over 10 psi. This definition is to show the difference between an industrial pressure regulator and a line pressure regulator, which is our next slide. A line pressure regulator, by definition, is one that is certified to CSA 6.22 or to UL 144, and so this definition was added. When installing these regulators, it is important to read the installation instructions for all the manufacturer's requirements to meet certification. Some of these regulators have restrictions on vent length. If you need to pipe the relief to the outside or away from a source of ignition, exceeding this length or the number of fittings may void its certification. This is the certified regulator that is required on 90% of all pounds jobs moving forward in the province of Saskatchewan. Second stage propane regulator. This is a sub-definition under the listed definitions of pressure regulator. This defines the common second stage regulator used in the propane industry in the province. Manual shutoff valve now has a definition under the 2025 B149.1. The definition shown here, vent limiter, originates in CSA 6.22 line pressure regulators and CSA 6.3 gas appliance regulator, but adds a pressure regulator's atmospheric diaphragm chamber to provide context. In the certification standards, the required maximum venting capacity of all types of vent limiters are always the same, 2.5 cubic feet per hour for natural gas and 1 cubic foot per hour for propane. Now that we have defined the new terms, let's move into Section 4 General. Just a note that in the presentation, new definitions have been written in red, so you can make notes of the new definitions in the code. 4.2.4 Other Gas. CSA B149.6 addresses the installation requirements for digester gas, landfill gas, and biogas. However, in some jurisdictions, this code is not adopted or enforced, which creates challenges for the installers, users, and approvers. Referencing this in the CSA B149.1, addresses these gases requirements, which helps clarify the requirements under CSA B149.1. Here we are at our first SAS Codes of Practice under Responsibility of Installer 4.3.9.1 Activation Data. The core of this code reference is that you need to check and set your manifold pressure if it is part of the manufacturer's startup, along with all the other manufacturer's requirements. The startup information must be documented in a prominent area or the manufacturer startup sheet that will be left with the manual on site. SAS Codes of Practice 4.5.5.1 Other Damages. This clause gives the clarification on suitability and requirements for inspection by gas contractor to include mechanical and electrical systems that have been exposed to smoke, fire, and the effects of fire suppression. When dealing with appliances that fall under 4.5.5, a red tag through our red tag program should be issued and submitted to TSASK for follow-up. Let's take some time and look at a red tag. Fill out your red tag with all the correct information on site. Make sure to put down the correct names, address, and phone numbers in a legible fashion. If no one can read it, or it's garbage information, then you're just wasting everyone's time. You can email from your smartphone the red tag to gis@tsask.ca. Then hang the red tag on the appliance shutoff so people can locate it when they're doing a follow-up inspection. After repairs have been made, fill out the back of the red tag in a legible fashion. Put what corrections were made and the permit number. Just a reminder that a permit number is not required for all red tags. If you needed to clean and service an appliance, then a permit would not be required. You can email a copy of the completed red tag, once again using your smartphone, to gis@tsask.ca. 473. Equipotential bonding. Let's break it down so you can explain it to your electrician friends. All building metal gas piping system, so in a building or on a building, connected to one or more gas-fired appliances. Examples are unit heater, furnace, or water heater, shall be made electrically continuous and shall be equipotentially bonded. Now A, B, and C gives the options. A says 6-gauge copper or 4-gauge aluminum with an accessible insulation. So if the gas line is bonded and the clamp is removed to alter the gas line, the clamp must be reinstalled so it's accessible. B needs to meet the electrical code. And C, permitted in clause 4.7.4. Continuing from clause 4.7.3c, we have 474, appliance bonding. Gas piping systems shall be considered to be bonded to the electrical system when the metal gas piping system or CSST certified with an arc-resistant jacket or coating system in compliance with CSA 6.26 used in a gas piping system is connected to one or more appliances permanently connected to the bonding conductor of the circuit supplying the appliance. The important parts of this clause is metal gas piping system or CSST certified with an arc-resistant jacket when the gas line is connected to one or more appliances permanently connected to the bonding conductor of the circuit supplying the appliance. 475. Bonding non-arc resistant CSST. The key to this code is the bonding shall be to the manufacturer's instructions when dealing with non-arc resistant CSST. We can look at an example on the next slide. Here is a drawing from one of the CSST manufacturers showing an additional bonding clamp on the brass CSST fitting adapter as one option to be compliant. Make sure to read the manufacturer's installation instructions for all your options for bonding requirements and pass this information on to the electrician on site. Now we will be moving on to Section 5, Pressure Controls. There's been some significant changes here. Some of the codes have been moved over from the Point 3, so some of this might be familiar. The requirements for 517 are intended to apply to second stage propane pressure regulators. Installed within a one or two family dwelling or row housing shall not be located more than 3 feet from the point where the propane supply enters the dwelling. The 3 feet refers to the distance the propane service can enter the building before the second stage regulator must be installed. This is not a standard installation that you would see here in the province. In this picture, it shows a second stage regulator installed in a typical fashion in the province. The hose used for a temporary line between the propane tank and the second stage regulator needs to be replaced in spring with a proper underground when the ground thaws. Paint the exposed gas line as required in 6.16.1, plus refer to Table 5.3 before installation for clearances from the regulator. 5212. Pressure regulators and overprotection devices. To meet clause 5211, which says that gas supplied to equipment needs to be in the range for the equipment, 5212 states that when delivery pressure is greater than the maximum rated pressure of the downstream valve train, appliance, or equipment, one or more or a combination of the following shall be installed: a line pressure regulator, certified, or B, an industrial pressure regulator. 5213. Pressure regulator features. Has an additional 2 clauses, Part E and F. The manufacturer's instructions is the key to Part E. Some regulators that are certified to a standard may not meet that certification if you do not follow the instructions set out by the manufacturer, such as regulator vent size and length, or a change of orifice size. For Part F, the lockup of the regulator cannot exceed 150% of the set pressure. New clause 5231 gives the conditions when and where an industrial regulator would be used. A. Before a line pressure regulator certified to CSA 6.22 or UL 144. B. Before another industrial pressure regulator. Or C. Before a high-low gas pressure device installed on a fuel train of the appliance, or in the downstream piping system upstream of the fuel train of the appliance. 5232. High and low pressure devices. Where high and low pressure devices are required in 5231, they shall be interlocked into the downstream appliance or appliances to cause safety shutdown when either devices detect a fault condition. Here are 2 of the most common seen devices on a valve train to shut down equipment when the high and low pressure situation is present. This clause was renumbered and reworded from the 2020 B149.1. 5233. Pressure regulators downstream of another pressure regulator. Where a pressure regulator is installed downstream of another pressure regulator, the downstream pressure regulator shall be protected by an overpressure protection device complying with clause 5.3. If failure of the upstream pressure regulator could result in exposing the downstream pressure regulator to an inlet pressure greater than the rated pressure. So, when you have 2 regulators in series, the first regulator drops the pressure from 20 psi down to 10 psi, and the second regulator is rated for an inlet pressure of 10 psi and drops the pressure down to 4 ounce, you would need to have a relief, whether full internal on the first regulator or an external relief between the two regulators to protect the second regulator so it could not be exposed to the 20 psi if a failure happened. 532. Overpressure protection devices. An overpressure protection device shall not be required for a Class 1 line pressure regulator certified to CSA 6.22 rated at 2 psi, provided every appliance it serves is equipped with either an appliance regulator certified to CSA 6.3 or a combination control valve certified to CSA 6.20. Appliances equipped with a regulator that meets either of these two standards are designed to operate normally when returned to the original intended operating pressure of less than or equal to 14 inches of water column after being exposed to a pressure as high as 2.5 psi, and so won't necessarily need an overpressure protection device if the line pressure regulator is certified to CSA 6.22. Appliances intended to operate at less than or equal to 14 inches water column and not equipped with such devices will still need an overpressure protection device. 533. Class 1 line pressure regulator. This clause is to ensure that only overpressure protection devices, or OPPDs, supplied as a unit with the regulator certified to CSA 6.22 are installed. This is the intent of this standard in Clause 4.14.3 of CSA 6.22-19, which reads, line pressure regulators with separate overpressure protection devices shall be factory pre-assembled and supplied to the field as a unit. Removal of Saskatchewan Codes of Practice Clause 5341 has occurred due to changes in Table 5.2 in the B149.1, which states that 10 psi is the maximum that can be used over the maximum rated inlet pressure. The next two slides fall under subsection 5.5, venting of pressure control devices, referring to the inclusion or exclusion of the construction of vent pipes for pressure control devices other than overpressure relief devices as per Clause 551. This establishes a list of eligible items in new Clause 5511, applying to bleed vents including but not limited to A. Automatic valves, B. Diaphragm valves, C. Combination controls. 5512 established lists of ineligible items in new Clause 551. Pressure regulators equipped with internal relief and line overpressure relief valves. 5513 removes the lists of eligible and ineligible items from the body of this clause, because they are already stated in new Clause 5511, restructuring wording so that the subject is the bleed vent. Part C gives the ability to connect bleed vents as permitted in 5515. Part D refers to Clause 5.6, which specifies termination and safe outdoor clearances. This and the next slide refer to 552, construction of vent lines for overpressure relief devices, establishes a list of eligible items in 5521 to help distinguish from other items covered in changes to Clause 551. 5522 establishes lists of ineligible items, to help distinguish from other items covered in changes to Clause 551. This Clause 5526 applies to relief valves that are external to the body of a pressure regulator. Clause 5527 still requires that regulators with full internal relief be piped independently to the outdoors and shall not be manifolded with any other vent line. 5541 falls under 554, venting, exemptions for pressure regulators. This simplifies and allows applications for both line pressure regulator and appliance regulators, and allows existing clause 5225, 5241, 5242, 5713, and 572 to be eliminated, streamlining the requirements. It replaces the term leak limiting system with vent limiter, in accordance with the inclusion of this as a defined term, as we referenced in definitions. Part C refers to specific installations under B149.3 for fuel trains over 400,000 BTUs per hour. New Clause 5542 includes the 25% LEL limit as written in the previous 5543 from the 2020 edition. The clearances in 5.6 become moot under this clause. However, clearances to source of ignition still do represent a risk and therefore are included. Notes were added to give some examples of spaces that would not be considered as being ventilated. Examples are closets, the space between a suspended ceiling and the underside of an above floor, or a room not having openings to an adjacent ventilated room or to the outdoors. 5543, line pressure regulator rated for 5 or 10 psi. The exemption permitted in Clause 5541 shall not apply to line pressure regulators for 5 psi or 10 psi when the fuel is propane. Table 5.3 is changed in the 2020 code with a further breakdown of clearances based on relief or bleed amount. You will need to know this regulator information from your supplier or utility so you can reference the correct column in the chart. Clearances from appliance vent outlets point you to the next slide referring to Dimension A or Dimension B. Dimension A is 1 foot or 0.3 of a meter in any direction from the vent termination, and additionally 3 feet horizontally to a height of 15 feet when an appliance termination is above the regulator. Dimension B is 3 feet with the same clearances when the appliance termination is above the regulator vent. This 3 feet from center line of the regulator vent exclusion zone to a height of 15 feet has been enforced in the province for years under the requirements of 8.14.8. We are working on a drawing for the Saskatchewan Codes of Practice to clarify these requirements that you can use as a reference. 572 pilots is a subsection of 5.7 pressure regulators on appliances using propane. This clause is something that you would not be referring to every day, but you would need to be aware of this if you're involved with design of equipment that requires a field approval under the B149.3 code or conversion of large capacity equipment to propane. We are now moving along to Section 6, Piping and Tubing Systems, Hose and Fittings. 6.2.12, Liquid Propane Hose Prohibition. This is for anyone involved with hooking up equipment to liquid propane, including grain dryers and asphalt plants. Hoses certified to CSA 8.3 are no longer acceptable. What we will be looking for are hoses certified to CSA 8.1. Press connect fittings are currently approved in sizes 4-inch and below to CSA 6.32. Piping greater than 4 inch shall be welded pipe joints. 615.2.2 is an interpretation to 615.2 piping connections in the B149.1 for underground using press fittings. This adds requirements for a site plan and isometric drawing submitted to TSASK in advance of the commencement of work. The second requirement is the submittal of certification and the company name of the company applying the corrosion protection as listed in the manufacturer's installation instructions. These requirements are to ensure that the installation location is archived in our system and the system meets all requirements for decades of safe operation. 815.8.1 is another interpretation to the National Code requiring a swing consisting of 2 consecutive 90s installed on the same horizontal plane. You will also notice that press connect fittings are allowed to be used on swings for undergrounds. The requirement of 10 inches between the center line of the 90s is still the same, as well as the requirement for a valve at each end of the underground, plus don't forget about your sleeves. 615.17 is our last interpretation to the underground section in the Saskatchewan Codes of Practice. This is allowing a new product to be approved for use in landslide areas. The use of X-risers is permitted with the other stipulations laid out in 615.17. This is primarily seen in the province due to soil conditions around lakes, rivers, and valleys. 616.9 Sleeve use. A sleeve shall enclose the entire length of pipe and tubing that passes through an exterior wall to an unheated, inaccessible building element. Sealed watertight, and the portion of the pipe or tubing shall be double wrapped with pipe wrap tape. This clarifies the sleeve needs to enclose the entire length of any pipe or tubing and the location where it is required. The last part refers to the use of pipe wrap tape, which is thicker and offers more protection than electrical tape, which is not acceptable. You can pick up pipe wrap tape from any of your piping wholesalers. 616.10 Sleeve material. When piping or tubing is run in a sleeve, the sleeve shall be of such material and so installed to protect the piping or tubing from damage and galvanic action. Use a material that meets the protection requirements but is not a dissimilar metal that would cause corrosion and failure of the piping or tubing. 616.16 Vehicle protection requirements. The changes to this clause was piping and tubing entering a building was changed to gas piping system. This is a requirement that all gas piping systems shall be protected from vehicular damage whether or not it enters a building. The method of vehicle protection has stayed the same in 2025. 617.4.3 is an interpretation to the National Code. The bulk of this code has stayed the same, but there was an addition on Part 4 that plastic zip ties are no longer acceptable in outdoor use when affixing tags to piping or tubing. We are finding they don't stand up to the environment in the province. This national code is not a common installation in Saskatchewan, but this makes sense. An underground tank is not obvious for first responders to notice, unlike an above-ground tank or cylinders. 618.10 makes aware to the first responders of the presence of combustible gas and permits the shutoff of the supply of propane prior to penetrating the building. An underground tank is not as accessible as an above-ground tank or cylinders to access the supply valve, especially in wintertime with snow cover or ice. In addition, all underground propane tanks need to be approved for use in the province prior to installation by the Chief Gas Inspector. Please contact your local gas inspector for all the requirements and procedures. 622.11 Notification. In the Saskatchewan Codes of Practice is an interpretation to the B149.1. This is stating what is already an industry standard to notify your inspector of air tests that needs to be witnessed, but has been expanded to include residential installations over 1 million BTUs with the changes to the Sask Energy meter set requirements. This is also the same requirements to notify inspections for startups over 1 million BTUs in 4.3.10 in the Sask Codes of Practice. 6.22.2 Before connection requirements. This is the pneumatic test procedure for gas piping systems, whether it is a new job, replacement, modification, or an addition to an in-service gas piping system. A states to remove anything that is not rated for the pressure of the pneumatic test. B states that the gauge must be 3 inches minimum in diameter with increments no more than 2 psi and a range of not less than 15% and no more than 300%. In C, it gives you the option of a pressure recorder that is calibrated to the same requirements of B, and D refers to Table 6.3 for all pressures and lengths of tests. 6.22.3 After connection requirements. After a successful pneumatic test, final connections have been completed and the air has been purged from the system. At this point, a dial test shall be completed by watching the dial on the meter or using a pressure gauge or equivalent device, if a meter is not provided, such as in a typical propane system. C gives the requirement for the gauge if a meter is not provided. D gives the duration of the test at 10 minutes. And E states that if a leak is detected, gas supply is shut off until the repairs have been made. 6.22.4 Valve train leak testing. This has been a long-standing practice in the industry. Make sure you take your time during this step to prevent any mistakes. This can be done with a gas detector or the timeless process of using soap. Make sure to use the proper soap for any time you are soap testing CSST. Failure to test can result in catastrophic results. Gas leaks will cause a loss of reputation for yourself and your company. 6.22.5 Addition to existing piping or tubing. The testing requirements are the same in accordance with 6.22, except when they meet the requirements of A. Addition is 20 feet or less, and normal working pressure is less than 0.5 psig, and the addition shall be leak tested as per 6.22.3, and B. Where the addition is accomplished using welding tie-in, the new system shall be tested in compliance with 6.22. The tie-in weld shall be tested in accordance with 6.22.3. Well, now that we have tested, we move on to 6.23.4, Purge, Discharging, and Operation. The changes here is better wording and the requirement of a combustible gas indicator. This clause gives the requirements for purging directly to the outdoors. The requirements of a qualified person to be at the open end of the purge with a combustible gas indicator. C gives the clearance from the end to source of ignition, mechanical air intakes, and building openings. D, the burner type to use while purging until a stable flame is established. E is the requirement to use to ignite the pressure vented or purge gas. And F, any person not involved in the purging or smoking shall be prohibited in all areas within 10 feet of the purge point. 6.23.7, Purging indoors, has not changed except the language is clearer. And the last sentence, where there is an open point of discharge during the purge, it shall be continuously attended by a qualified person with a combustible gas indicator. 6.25.1, Piping Support. This clause lays out the material to be used and spacing referring to Table 6.2 for 1-inch pipe and greater shall comply with 6.2, and support shall be provided at every fitting. Pipe less than 1 inch shall be vertically supported in accordance with 6.2 and horizontally every 4 feet. Section 7. Installation of specific types of appliances. 714. This is an interpretation in CSA Codes of Practice. ULC 636 PVC shall not be used as a venting material for Category 4 condensing boilers. Your options may include CPVC 636 venting system, polypropylene system, or stainless steel system. Make sure to follow the venting manufacturer's instructions for installation of their specific product, and use the proper adapter for the appliance as listed by the venting manufacturer. For instantaneous water heaters, check the rating plate to see what standard they have been certified to. If they are certified to a boiler standard, then this requirement needs to be followed. 7241. Certification falls under the larger section of 7.2, generators, compressors, pressure boosters, engines, and turbines. This clause simply states that an engine or turbine shall be certified to ULC 2200 or comply with CSA B149.3. Check your rating plate on the equipment for the certification before installation. For your basic household generator, they seem to be more common, and before hooking them up, refer to the installation instructions provided. Things to look out for: the installation of the flex in the proper orientation, clearances from around the unit, regulators, building openings, or from combustibles. 7241 is an interpretation to the National Code giving an exemption to engines in agriculture and oil field industry. In addition, any other engines up to 500 horsepower shall comply with point 1, 2, or 3. This is not an exception for generators that power farmhouses or shops. 7244 venting. This clause has been changed from the 2020 code and simplified, so if you have a pressure regulator or overpressure relief device installed in the valve train of an engine or turbine, it shall be vented in accordance with clause 5.5, with an outdoor vent termination in accordance with 5.6. The venting of combination regulating and vaporizing equipment shall not be required where a solenoid valve is installed upstream of the equipment has stayed the same. 743. Flexible exhaust ducting. The standard UL 2158A was added to the clause instead of saying certified. Now it shows what the certification is for a gas dryer. Make sure when you purchase material that it meets this standard for all gas dryers. 72014 kitchens. When a direct-fired makeup air heater is either installed in or ducted to a kitchen, the clause has stayed much the same from the 2020 code, with the addition of A3 of an approved engineering design. This gives additional options rather than 1 or 2. B continues to state that all other requirements of clause 7.20 shall apply where applicable. 721.9. Exhaust interlocking. Currently, there is a requirement for exhaust fan interlocking, but there is no criteria in the code for how the interlocking is to be done, other than 721.13 in a kitchen. This new clause provides a safe and simple interlocking method for appliances to the exhaust fans. 721.13 kitchens is the same clause as 720.14, except the makeup air has been changed to a non-recirculating direct gas-fired industrial air heater, or DFIAH. Once again, Clause A3 was added of an approved engineering design to give more options, but everything else has stayed the same from the 2020 code. Section 8. Venting Systems and Air Supply for Appliances. 8.12.1.1. Chimney and Venting Interpretations in the Saskatchewan Codes of Practice, Section B. Existing tile line masonry chimney in sound condition. Part 2. When replacing a central heating appliance or altering the BTU load on the venting system, install a metal liner in accordance with Section G or a Type B gas vent. This is an existing code of practice that was reworded to say a central heating appliance and not the central heating appliance. The altering of BTU load was also added due to situations where significant reduction of BTU load on the chimney, but the central heating appliances were not touched. An example is a commercial building where 2 natural draft water heaters were removed and replaced with a bank of hot water on demand units, reducing the BTU load on the chimney by nearly 400,000 BTUs. Don't forget to check out our website at www.tsask.ca. You can also contact us by phone or email. If you have any questions in regards to this presentation, please reach out to your local TSASK gas inspector.